There are a few things that have divided the close-knit pilot community more than the dropship camera. I rarely meet two pilots that seem to agree on a preferred view. So let's go back and look at the views from build 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 and now 1.6. I'll show you all the views so you can compare them, and I'll cover the issues we have and offer some solutions. I'm afraid that the footage from 1.3 is mainly from my days of using an iPad to film, so the quality is not as good as 1.4, 1.5 and 1.6, but I don't think it's too much of a problem. So notice the camera only shows the middle of the screen, so the bottom of the ship is missing. You could see the whole back of the ship in 1.3. I warn you up front, this is going to be a bit much to take in, with all four of these things on the screen at the same time, so watch it for a bit, then I'll do some analysis and point out the differences. So that was a bit of a visual overload, I know, so let's take the two main elements and look at just those. They're the position of the camera from behind and the position of the camera from above. Let's look at the rear position first. This is level flight from all four. Let me repeat that, and I'll pause it halfway through so that we can see the differences more clearly. But first let me just cover the terms so you can understand my analysis more easily. The camera is here. This is your point of view. If the ship seems further away, then there's less zoom, closer, and there's more zoom. If the back of the ship is more visible, there's more height, and if it seems further below you, there is less height. All these views are the ships flying level from each build. Let's have a look at 1.3, top left, first. In this build, the camera had a low zoom and was very high. This allowed you to see the whole ship. Take my word on that, as this footage has a different camera view to the rest. The high camera also made the ship appear further below you. Look at the crosshair and compare it to the other cameras. Notice how the center of the crosshair is well above the ship's nose. This view gave great visibility and awareness in level flight. You could see where you were going, and you could see enough around the ship to identify and react to threats. However, such a distant view could make level flight tricky, as the remote perspective made judging your position relative to the ground difficult. In 1.4, top right, to address the issue 1.3 had for many, with the ship feeling too remote and tricky to navigate around obstacles, the zoom was greatly increased and the height dropped. In level flight, that meant we could not see the whole ship. Notice how you can't see the thrusters at the rear at all. The crosshair dropped down low and was now just above the nose. The result of this change on level flight was that you could see very well over the ship, and this made forward flight very easy. Being close to the ship and peering over the top gave a good perspective for straight and level flight, but as soon as you turned, the ship's rear would rise obscenely into your face, blocking your view almost completely, making it difficult to see where you were going, and very difficult to see incoming threats, as you can see in this clip. This is a result of too much zoom combined with a low height. It fixed some of the issues we had in 1.3, as judging where the ground was became easier, but it became very difficult in level flight to see when you turned. In 1.5, bottom left, the zoom was backed off a bit so the ship's rear was less in your face, and they also dropped the height very low. Dropping the height this much meant, as you can see, that in level flight you ended up staring directly into the rear of your ship. It was like trying to see past your own head when standing in a room with mirrors in front and behind you. Like this. The ship obstructed your forward view considerably. The decreased zoom helped, as now we could see the rear of the ship without it blocking our view when you turned, but the change wasn't quite enough to fix the issues we had. In 1.6, bottom right, the ship looked smaller than 1.5. This is because they decreased the zoom and moved the height back up a little. Look up to 1.4. done over to 1.5. See how the crosshair in 1.4 is just above the nose, well below the nose in 1.5, but on the nose in 1.6. Keeping the crosshair low, but not too low, makes level flight easier. You go where you're looking, but it's not too low that the ship's in your way. The zoom has a great impact on flight, but a greater one on survival. Look at all four views again, but this time focus on the space to the left and right of the ship and to the space above it. These bits here. The left and right view is your lateral view. Notice how much lateral view you have in 1.3 and how little you have in 1.4. 1.5 is better than 1.4 and 1.6 is better still. This matters because this is the space you often see swarms approaching in or forge guns charging from. The ability to see laterally gives you reaction time to threats. Have a look again, but this time at the space above and below the ship. Too much zoom and too little height, like 1.4, means no lateral view and no ability to see threats below you. 1.4 gave great views of the sky above you at the cost of zero ability to see down or laterally. They addressed this issue in 1.5 by moving the ship up on your screen and by moving it central, so they gave you equal views all around the ship. But this was at the cost of your ship blocking your view in flight. Compare 1.5 to 1.6. Notice how they dropped the height and zoomed away slightly. This increased the space you can see above you, to the left and to the right, but it reduces the space you see below you. It also made it so the ship does not block your view of the distance when you're in flight. So let's go through the evolution of the camera, so you can see why the changes were made. 1.3 was a bit floaty feeling to many, not all, but many. The remote camera made it tricky to judge how high you were or to fly level without losing altitude. CCP listened to the concerns of many. They brought the camera in nice and tight to the ship in 1.4, so your view was like you were on the roof. You could easily judge altitude, and you were looking exactly level with the direction you were going in. This fixed the floaty feel of 1.3. However, zoomed in so much made it really difficult to know where your bum was, so pilots found themselves clipping their rear on buildings and being blinded by the ship when they turned. Again, CCP listened to our concerns and tried to address it. In 1.5, they pulled the camera back so we could see our ships again, and they dropped the height so the ship wouldn't loom onto the screen when we turned. But now it blocked our view when flying forward, which made the simple task of going somewhere a challenge. CCP listened to our concerns again, and we find ourselves at 1.6. We can see over our nose, and we can see the whole ship. But we're not too far away like 1.3. 1.6 is very close to 1.3, but not exactly the same. The difference is more in the view from above than it is from behind, although the overall effect from the changes to above and behind are what gives the feel of 1.6 a different one to 1.3. So that's the most common view for flight. But what about a view from above? This view is used by combat and non-combat craft for maneuvering and is a key part of an assault craft's combat tactics. The assault dropship often shoots on targets from a hover, so to give you an idea, here's some footage of all four builds using a view from above in combat. Let's take that view and pause it to give a similar camera angle. In 1.3 you can see when looking down to shoot or land, you're able to view the entire ship. The crosshair in this view passes through the middle of the ship when you hover, and when you look down at targets below you. The changes in 1.4 meant that the rear was no longer visible. This led to clipping it on structures or even killing potential passengers when landing to pick them up. It also led to situations like this, where the pilot has a harder time judging the length of the ship, catches the rear in mid-flight and crashes. Also in 1.4, as there was more zoom, i.e. being closer to the back of the ship, the crosshair was on the ship's nose. This meant you could shoot down without having your ship block your view. It was giving pilots this ability that pushed the rear of the ship off the screen. So in 1.5 they raised the height of the view and zoomed back a bit. Compare 1.4 to 1.5. Notice the ship looks smaller on screen and the rear is now visible, so landing and manoeuvring are easier. The other result of the change from 1.4 to 1.5 was that now when flying level you shoot through the ship at all times, and through the middle front when firing from above. Notice how the crosshair is pulled back from the nose in 1.5 compared to 1.4. Many people found this was too difficult to fight with, as targets were often tiny black dots and were impossible to see from even a modest height, as the ship was always in the way. In an attempt to get the crosshair on the nose and keep the whole ship visible at the same time, in 1.6 they raised the height, so you were further above the ship. Compare 1.5 and 1.6. In both views you can see about the same amount of the ship, but in 1.6 the ship looks smaller. Now compare this distance on each camera view, from the tip of the nose to the top of the screen. 1.6 shows a lot more map than 1.5. This lets you see more map, which helps you avoid obstacles and see incoming AV fire. So 1.6 is a blend of all the requested features. You can see the whole ship. You also have good visibility around your craft for manoeuvring and general flight. There's an issue with 1.6 though. It makes things below us appear even smaller as our eyes are effectively higher up. It can mean pilots end up getting closer than in previous builds to ground targets just so they can see them. 1.5 and 1.6 are very similar from the flight angle and the above view. So let's take those two and highlight the small differences. This is level flight over the same terrain. Let's freeze that here. The crosshair is higher in 1.6 as the camera height has raised slightly, but it's a small change. 1.6 just allows the crosshair to be above the ship. The lower zoom is also easily visible here. Notice how much bigger, or zoomed in, the ship is in 1.5. The same small change is apparent when the view is from above, as when you're shooting targets in an assault dropship. Look at this freeze frame. Less zoom means we can see more of the ship, but that pulls the crosshair back into the ship, so you shoot through it more. It's a subtle change, but look here at these black points on the nose design. In 1.5 the crosshair is in front of the points, but behind them in 1.6. So those are the views we have. Join a pilot channel and ask about people's favourite view, and you'll find that most people don't agree on the best view. 1.3 was liked by many assault pilots as the central crosshair meant we could drop from up high and directly onto our targets from above, thus remain unseen until it was too late for them to react. This gave us a first strike advantage. But 1.3 was hated by others who found the ship obstructed ground troops too much. 1.4 brought the feeling of close and fast flight to the dropship, and many liked it for the feeling of flying it gave. Others were made vomit-inducingly sick by the rear end waving in their faces. 1.5 was good for fast scouts and pilots who preferred low-altitude flight as a threat avoidance tactic, as it made high-speed type manoeuvres close to and under structures easy. But pilots of assault craft found it too difficult to use in combat, as too much of the ship occupied the screen. 1.6 is the crosshair back a bit from 1.5, but the whole ship is in view. This suits assault players, transporters, and logis too, but some find the distance too remote feeling and the camera tricky for shooting when directly above the target. Now all of these views are valid, so how can we make everyone happy? One solution is to map L3 to 3 views, not 2. Press L3 to go to first person view, press again and go to view 1, and again to view 2. There's a big problem with this solution, however. When you're in a dogfight like this, the first person is very useful for shooting a dropship that's taking evasive maneuvers. Dogfighters often flick between first and third person. If we had 3 or more views mapped to the same button, it would be very disorientating. There is another option that avoids this. Have tick boxes in the settings screen. You get first person and one other view that you select with the tick box, or even a choice of any 2 views, so you can have 2 different third person views, or you can have a third person and a first person. While we're talking about views, we have to mention the passenger view. Look how restrictive this is. I have very little idea when would be a good time to exit, or if the area below is a wasteland or an enemy AR spraying party. This lack of orientation is also an issue in first person. As you accelerate, the nose tips forwards. This often leaves you looking at nothing but the ground. It can be very difficult to fly like this. This view is often used for aerial combat, as I mentioned, where often all we can see is the sky. The issue here is that with no horizon indicator or altitude meter, I cannot tell if I'm level or falling to my death. The biggest divider it seems for assault pilots is the 1.4 versus 1.6 above view. In 1.4 you didn't have to shoot through your ship, you do in 1.6. One main cause of the dislike is that shooting through your ship targets are impossible to see. It's not a rendering issue either. Look at this frame. There's a swarmer down there, and he has rendered. See if you can find him. He has plenty of time to act, reloading in this case, while I try and find him, and he can see me easily. And it's worse because if there are a group of people that do render, they're all so small, I can't tell which one has the AV weapon. Imagine you use a rifle, and you walk into a room and you see this. Which one's the threat? Not all of them can kill you, you need to find the one that can, and he's the one you need to engage. Imagine you had to wait for him to shoot at you first before you knew who to kill. He has the advantage every time. For pilots, this is part of the camera issue. I need to shoot below me. Dropships need much greater passive scan range. An enemy below a ship should have a chevron, and AV players should have a special colour just for them. I've used yellow. This gives me as a pilot the same chances an AR user gets when he sees a group of enemies. He can tell which one's the threat, or which is the biggest threat, and which is not. The chevrons help us see through ourselves to shoot as well. There are a lot of issues to do with cameras, and I'm going to leave it here. I'll do more of them after 1.7 drops in case we have any other big changes. But for now this can be a reference for the history of the dropship camera from 1.3 to 1.6, and we can use it as a discussion reference. I've started a vote thread on the Dust forums. The URL is in the description, and you can go to it by clicking the tick icon in the bottom right of this video.